As the story goes, I always planned to kind of move to Los Angeles and kind of do this like Bret Easton Ellis, lifestyle fantasy, and come up to Boston for a year. And it's now been 15, and I'm probably going to die here. It's all a blur, It's those years at the Phoenix, and then I was with the Boston Herald for 4 years. What was cool about the Herald was that I was at the Herald at a time where they still didn't understand the internet, and I had an editor who I got along really well with, and she gave me this column in the Boston Herald art section, where I could pretty much just write about whatever I wanted. It was kind of anecdotal stuff, little news and notes kind of thing. And a new editor took over, and I didn't really get along with him. He was this kind of typical old Boston rock dinosaur who just did not get what was going on, and they kind of banished me to the internet. And they were like, "We're going to take your column out of print, and we're going to put it online, and haha, no one's going to read it, no one's going to care." No one edited it, so I learned how to self-edit that way. And it ended up being so far off the radar at the Herald that I was able to write about whatever I wanted. And if a band was doing a record release party at O'Brien's on a Tuesday night, I could write 1,000 words about it because I thought it was cool, and no one was over my shoulder saying, "No one cares about that, don't write about that, make sure you write about the Dropkicks playing a Gannis," or whatever. And so it allowed me to kind of develop I guess a reputation of kind of heralding new bands, and no pun intended, or championing new bands that might not have gotten press elsewhere. And because of the growth of the internet in the late 2000s and social media, more people were reading it than the crusty old dude reading the Herald in the morning with his morning coffee, who didn't give a about those bands anyway. But I think as a writer and a music editor, I spent 3 years as music editor of the Boston Phoenix, and I think it was important to kind of identify what was going on in the city and kind of be a voice of what was happening, whether it was a band that was selling out their record release party at the Sinclair, or whether it was a band playing in Allston off Linden Street to 40 people. That was the greatest show ever. I think it was important to. It's tricky because a lot of bands form here and then leave here. I just saw Passion Pit at the Sinclair, for the Converse Rubber Track series on Tuesday, and Michael Angelakis came out. "Hey, we're Passion Pit from Boston, Massachusetts." He hasn't lived in Boston in 7 years. They all got the hell out of town as soon as they signed a record deal. But they still say, "Hey, we're from Boston, Massachusetts," and everyone just went crazy and screamed. And probably half the people in that room were not here in 2008 when they first got started. That first Passion Pit show at the Pill was definitely not sold out, and I think the room was half full at the time for that show. They played again 2 years later, and there was a line down the street, so it was cool watching that. When I first moved here, I moved to Somerville, moved in with a friend of mine who I knew back in New York. After 2 years, I moved to Allston. I got a place right on the corner of Harvard and Brighton Avenues, above what's now Refuge Cafe, and there was that energy that kind of just continued. You felt like you were part of the. You felt like the music scene was a full-time job when you lived in Allston. It was, you would see people all the time. You would run into people on the street. I remember when Avalon and Axis closed several years ago, I rolled into the 24-hour Tedeschi in Allston, near Twin Donuts, and I saw some dude who used to work security at Avalon, and saw him. We were both faced off of our heads, and he goes, "Yeah, it's turning into a house of blues, whatever." And he walked away, and I scrolled it down on a piece of paper because I always have a notepad, I always have a pen with me. And I woke up the next morning, and I was like, Avalon becomes a house of blues. And I looked into it, and I had the scoop on that before anyone else had it. And that was something that you can only get there in Allston. You can only get some weird scoop from some disgruntled former employee of some business at 4 in the morning waiting in line buying a bag of fucking Funyuns.